To me, the American dream has to be about hope and opportunity for everyone.
I came from a really lower middle class family.
I grew up in the projects and federally subsidized housing.
I spent a lot of my life on the third floor around the corner. We would come down here and basically we would play here.
The neighborhood has changed a lot.
Yes,
but
it's
how has
very
it
nice.
changed since you grew up?
Oh, when I was a kid 100 years ago, heroin destroyed this neighborhood at one time. There were bonfires out here.
You said you felt somewhat judged as a New Yorker. How?
The rest of the country does not look uncritically at New York City.
I was an average kid. No one said, oh, he's gonna, achieve the American dream. No one.
Do you think you could have been as successful without that struggle?
I wouldn't be here without the struggle as a poor kid growing up in the project.
It gave me inspiration to be better and do better, to let go of what was negative and move forward.
Down deep, there was always that competitive sense. You're on your own, buddy.
The world can happen to you or you can happen to the world.
I was in no means going to be satisfied not to be very successful. I never said it to anyone, but I could feel it.
I grew up in Queens, in a neighborhood crowded with blue-collar families. Go back a generation or two, we all came from someplace else. At home, some of us spoke Italian, some Spanish, and some Korean. But in the street and at school, we all spoke with an accent. College Point to Midtown, 40 minutes. But most of us had no connection to that world. Yet some kids from even tougher neighborhoods went on to achieve success beyond their wildest dreams.
Okay, so this is Allerton Avenue. This is the beginning of my neighborhood. It looks exactly the same. It's not the same because the neighborhood was different. We hung out in the streets. In the 50s, there was a little bit of a freedom, especially if you're in the Bronx. The positive is you didn't really expect much of yourself. 17A was, I lived in probably the noisiest apartment in the building. It just reminds me of playing a lot of ball here, handball, and the only other thing it reminds me of is listening to the noise constantly from all the kids playing in the courtyard. that was it.
We played ball all day long on the weekends, and the schoolyard was filled with every nationality you can imagine. It was Italian, it was Puerto Rican, it was Cuban, it was African American. I was imprinted early on, every single day, in the one elevator in our building, walking down the street in Brooklyn, with an understanding of ethnic diversity. And as a result of that, my ideas, my understanding, my sensibility was built very early on.
Wow, you guys were really close to the highway.
Yep. We lived right on top of the highway and right on the bridge. That was what we protected ourselves from.
This is noisy.
And this is what it is all the time.
And I'm used to noisy.
There were people who they were poor too, but they had more than I had. So there was definitely gradations of poor, and we realized that we were on the real bottom gradation of poor. Yeah, this is the building,
and it still looks pretty much the
same. This is the friggin' same. Not everybody starts here. Where you start doesn't foretell where you're going to end at all.
Did your mom ever tell you, be careful? What were the words of wisdom that she gave you?
My mother, she worried a lot about our safety, but she also gave me many cautions. Watch out laying down with these boys, because they'll get you pregnant, always. Don't do that. Many cautions almost every day about drugs. Drugs were everywhere. On a day like today, they would be in the Play Street or they would be in the places here. And sometimes we'd be sitting on the stoop.
And the dealers, they would come up to the door?
They would be hanging out here with you.
This was a heroin block. We sold weed on that corner. It was a sweet church-going community. The kids got into all kinds of mischief, and the neighborhood went down because of all the drugs that were pushed into the community. I think that was my house right there, 10422.
10422?
16. This is it right here.
This is it.
10416. Right there, that's my crib. I grew up in there. These kids all went to jail. These kids all went to jail. My brother went to jail for a bit, but became a great artist, and but he went to jail the same as everybody else, for drugs.
I haven't been back to my old neighborhood in, I would say, in 50 years. And the reason I don't want to go back is because I'm aware of the selective memory, and I don't want to go back and say, oh, this place is awful.
Well, the 1930s in New York was a rough time. This was a great economic depression. I think it was an era of stalled ambition. It was also a period under Mayor LaGuardia of a tremendous expansion of public services, in part to meet with that need. Well, in some ways, the 1950s was a kind of heyday for New York because we still had a very thriving blue-collar economy. By the 1960s, that was already beginning to deteriorate. It moved away from an extreme individualism. It built a kind of sociability into these kids. So it was a big part of what it meant to grow up in the city of New York.
I was an only child. My dad always kind of worked. And when you grow up in the 50s, happy is a different definition than today. Your parents really didn't spend much, in my case, they didn't spend much time with me. My mom died and I was 16, was probably my unhappiest, but I knew she was dying for a while. And you can't really articulate when you're a young kid. All of a sudden you don't have a mother, but the fortunate part is I had a great backup system. My 3 aunts, one is surviving now, were there as my mothers. There was no lifestyle like it is today, going away and vacations and all that. You were in the neighborhood.
It was a very blue-collar environment. My parents obviously did not have much money. My dad was an Army veteran, not an educated man, who came back from World War II with a lot of issues from the war.
My parents were divorced, and so I lived with my mother. My mother was basically working all the time. Now, I did see my father periodically, but he was an absent father in that sense.
My parents were great. My father, was a teacher. My mother was a park director. My father became a professor of Black history.
My mother removed a lot of the pressure from us. I knew that it was a struggle. I knew she was tired a lot. That was the thing that I really, and had a very short temper, therefore. Not bad. She didn't like to take a lot of crap, and she would make that clear.
There was one incident which kind of defined my life in so many ways. When I was 7 years old, I came home from school. I walked into the apartment and my father was on a couch with a cast from his ankle to his hip. And he fell on a sheet of ice in March of 1960 and had a bad injury. And the result of that was he was fired. He was dismissed. There was no workman's compensation. There was no health care. And I saw firsthand, literally, the fracturing of the American dream.
Who influenced you negatively?
The gang members that I was in, they weren't bad kids. They were no worse than me. We were just kids. So that was what we did. We wanted junk. We wanted the new shell toe Adidas, whatever it was. We wanted it. We wanted to buy it. We wanted to be part of what they sold us, this American dream that we're talking about today.
Was there anyone in the neighborhood outside of your family that you think instilled that work ethic and that competitiveness in you?
Remember, this is just before World War II and in the early years of the war. There was this huge flood of immigrants which landed in the East Coast. A lot of them were extraordinarily skilled. I mean, I grew up with, I think, with a lot of people who really made it big.
Did anyone ever tell you to tone down the accent?
Oh, lots. And I've now decided that it's not changing. I mean, I decided this about 20 years ago. I speak fast. When I give a speech, I try like heck to enunciate and slow down. But if I'm having a conversation with you, this is it.
You know, a lot of America looked on New York as a foreign country, you know, and not one they particularly liked either. In the post-World War II era, if you're looking at white New Yorkers, 16% of them were Protestant. Half of New York City was Catholic, a quarter of it was Jewish, right? And then, of course, you had a large black population. So, you know, there was a lot of hostility or sense that there was something wrong with those people. Of course, that's only one piece of it. New York also was the great cultural center. It was the center of glamour. So, you know, it was a complicated relationship to the rest of the country. But a lot of Americans looked at New York and did not like what they saw.
What was it about that neighborhood that really characterized its people?
Well, they were all hardworking. There was no real backup. And so everybody worked away as best they could. They had to work or they'd starve.
How much of your success do you attribute to where you were raised, where you grew up?
Oh, I don't think you can ever figure out exactly that, but I think a lot. Because the drive, you know, I think I had a burning ambition inside. I want to prove the world wrong, maybe. I wanted to prove my dad that I could make up for what my dad didn't have. And with that burning ambition, I guess it threw off the middle class thing and said, I really want to be successful.
I think New York was a big enabler for me. It was a big enabler. One was the physical infrastructure. I could go from the bottom of Manhattan all the way up to the Cloisters or the Botanical Gardens on 20 cents. Now, 20 cents was a lot of money, but if you got the 20 cents, you can get all the way there and get all the way back. You didn't have to have a car, you didn't have to know anything. You can get to anywhere in this massive 5 boroughs. It's an amazing thing. Go around the world. You can't get access to that in a lot of other places. You come here and there is an ability, there is a chance that you can do better.
We used to have a big venue right there where people would come and a lot of artists would come, even from Harlem and the Bronx or whatever, they would come perform there. Grandmaster Flash, I remember meeting him first. He lived in an abandoned building and his electricity came from the light pole.
You know, rap is one of the most amazing New York contributions to culture because, you know, it really started in the 1970s at one of the low points for New York. You know, this is the so-called fiscal crisis. It was really the only period when New York was depopulating because conditions were very rough. And it's out of this era that seems so, you know, despairing in some ways, growing out of sort of working class, non-white neighborhoods, you know, it created a worldwide culture, and this came out of the streets of New York.
It was December 24th on Hollis Avenue, the dark, when I seen a man chilling with his dog at the park.
South Queens was a lower middle class neighborhood where there was some opportunity.
I mean, how did you keep clean? Why didn't you ever get
wrapped
up in it?
I did get wrapped up, but I was lucky enough to pull myself together and get out, right? A big part of it was my parents. What up, man? What's going on? All right, I went to college, and that's when I discovered hip hop in 1977, and Eddie Chiba and Curtis Blow and DJ Hollywood and Grandmaster Flash and these artists inspired me to promote parties with them.
The one thing musicians do is they play in a dance band, you're on for 40 minutes, and then you go off at 20. The rest of the band would walk off the set and into a room, and there was this green smoke coming out of the bottom, which was marijuana, which to this day I can smell at 50 yards. And I would, on the side, I'd go off and read. I was sort of the band intellectual who did their income taxes.
George Washington High School was a very competitive school.
I assumed so, but I didn't know it at the time. I was a bright kid. I didn't always do my homework, but in things I could do well, I liked to do. I was good at math. I didn't realize that I was a good student until I went to college, when I ended up summa cum laude. Now, if you had asked me when I was in high school, would I end up with a bachelor's degree summa cum laude, I would say the chances were 0.
What was Cathedral like?
Cathedral was hard, it was tough. Cathedral was tough. So I grew up in the Lower East Side, and I had never gotten out and walked above the Lower East Side of Manhattan. There was no reason for me to be there. This is where richer people lived. It was like going to another country for going to school, even though it was 2 miles away from where I lived. It was really interesting. But Cathedral was absolutely amazing. Very disciplined as well. Lots of work. And we had a large number of religion classes. Everything from belief in Jesus. We had a class called Leaving, Cleaving, and Becoming One Flesh. It took me a long time to figure out what that, it's a marriage class. We had health education all taught by nuns. So it was kind of a little bit of a comical environment, but it was serious.
I was an average student, and I just never liked school. It wasn't fun to be in school. Look, if you're sitting next to Philip, every test he gets an A. He sat there in all my classes. I don't want to say his last name, but I remember him perfectly. And this is high school, 4 torturous years, and every test he gets is an A. It's demoralizing. Now, there was a lot of kids, because that school got a lot of smart kids, not a lot of rich kids in those days. It was intimidating. But Bronx Signs changed my life, because it became a place where I started meeting kids who lived in Manhattan, or in Riverdale, or in Queens. And I started to see, wow, there's really a whole different kind of a world outside of my own little neighborhood.
I can remember early on just realizing that I wanted to get out of Brooklyn. I wanted to get out. I felt that there were things that were not available to us, and it drove me athletically to try and succeed on the athletic field to enable me to get out.
This
Oh
is
my
me.
God!
That's me.
That is really cool.
Wow, look at my hair. Look at the earrings, that's me. I would have been totally nondescript. I didn't do anything. I didn't create any trouble. I didn't play sports. You know, I did whatever you were forced to, like, do a play or something like that. I did those kinds of things. When I was a junior, we had a counselor, a guidance counselor. Her name was Sister Rosemary. And she said, so here are the options that you have. You can become a nun, and you could become a nurse, and you could become a teacher. So which one do you want to be? And I said, well, none. I didn't none of those. I definitely didn't want to be a nun. So I went to the library and I looked up, and they had a book called the Barron's Book for Education, and it gave you all the universities in the United States. All of them are in this book. This is the library.
This is where you pulled out that Barron's book.
The Barron's book, yeah, it was somewhere. Remember, it was all books? Mm-hmm. And now it's all computers.
All computers, yeah.
And they also had, interestingly enough, the careers that paid the most money. And I said, okay, I wanted to go to the most competitive. And I wanted to be a chemical engineer, because it paid $24,000.
You remember that?
Yep. I got, my first pay was $29,004.
But you got out.
Yeah.
You went to Michigan.
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, when I got to Michigan, I had never been to a place like this before. That was an experience for me that began to open up my world. I think my life experience has been somewhat different as a result of growing up in this melting pot in Canarsie, in Brooklyn. We were trying to climb the ladder of the American dream, every family. The struggle that everyone had at that time was the same.
I think in New York City, there's this unstated issue of, am I successful enough? Because no matter what, there's always people who are more successful. And the city reminds you of that every single day of your life. Every day. So I give them credit. You know, I give the city credit.
I remember going into Manhattan for the first time. My aunt took me to Radio City. Radio City seemed like the biggest thing on the planet. I couldn't even take it in. And then after Radio City, she took me to something else, which was an automat. I remember asking my aunt, how did that happen? And she told me there was a magician on the other side of the wall. And of course I believed it. And that was also the early shaping of me understanding the power of being a retail merchant.
One of the things I think about New York is that it was a rich life even if you were poor. Because there was such a public life, public institutions that you could take advantage of. And it was a kind of communal life, so you kind of shared this together. I mean, there is a kind of a hustler, wise guy component to the street life, the popular culture of New York. Everyone's looking for an angle, everyone's looking to cut a corner, because if you don't, you're gonna die, you're not gonna survive. A lot of people from outside of New York find rather distasteful, actually. A lot of people don't like that. And I think that's built into the kids' culture also, so it's very competitive but also communal at the same time. I think they're two sides of the same thing.
Did you ever feel professionally disadvantaged or judged because of where you came from? Did you ever feel that?
Oh, of course. But the strange thing is that, I thought I wouldn't be let into the upper echelons of American society, but it wasn't true. I mean, I ended up in all the best clubs in my 20s, and I must say, looking back in retrospect, I kept taking the right path all the time and ending up where I never expected to be.
So you had a high IQ, but you had a little bit of a lack of confidence. Where did the lack of confidence come from?
In the early stages of my economic career, there was still a degree of, I wouldn't say lack of confidence, but there's a belief that I would never make it to the next stage, which probably in a way was very helpful, because then I tried all the more. Or when I first really got into business, I recognized that going up the corporate ladder is a very laborious and very, I wouldn't say frustrating, but because I never did it. So I chose to do something different. I chose to go into business for myself and work on the outside and move up that way. And I found myself, in my late 20s, sitting in major corporate boardrooms and lecturing the chief executive officers about their businesses.
I worked for a couple of years at Xerox, and I was invited to this thing called the Quality of Work-Life Council. A gentleman asked a question of Waylon Hicks, who I didn't really know who he was. I just knew he was a manager of some sort.
He asked about diversity, more women in the workforce,
in the workforce.
Right?
Why are we hiring all of these different types of people and women? And Waylon Hicks answered the question just like pretty mechanically. And I raised my hand, and we got into this thing, this back and forth, where it was not an argument, but it was definitely not a friendly conversation. 2 days later, he called me. This guy, Waylon Hicks, called me. I think I'm going to be fired. The net of it was that there was a way to disagree, and that the way that you disagreed was inappropriate. But I get your point. A year after that, would you come and work for me as my executive assistant? My response is, executive assistant? I have a master's degree in engineering. I mean, are you serious? And it was the most important job from a career perspective that I took. That was when I made the big move from being a technical person only to running a business as well.
Would you say you've had a few lucky breaks along the way?
I think I've been incredibly fortunate and blessed, yes. I think the trip I took to Italy in 1983 was literally the change of my life. And that was being in Milan and Rome and Verona and walking around those places and seeing coffee bars everywhere and walking in and having this epiphany about the sense of community and coffee as the conduit, and just thinking, God, there's an opportunity to do that in America. I think that opened my world, and then getting rejected by so many people. But what I learned is that guiding principles and culture can define a company, and that is the secret of our success.
Is there like a teaching or a learning moment from your childhood that you have used as an inspiration for what you do at work every day?
Every single day of my life, there's something that comes from the reservoir of my experience.
For you, at least through your father's eyes, was working hard but also earning more money.
He wanted to earn more money for himself, and therefore I wanted to earn more money to prove to him that I could. Once I took the payroll from his job to the bank, and of course I looked through the entire payroll, of who was earning what. In his company, it was a small clothing manufacturer, and it was very upsetting for me to see what he was earning, because it was the lower end of the scale, and I always thought he earned more. And I always worked jobs from the time I was 13 to 14 years old. I always worked. And I thought there was a great discipline. It's not about, and I always say, it's not about your grades in school, because I had average grades, because a lot of people put their grades on their resume, and I always ask, well, what does that mean? Well, there's all these different factors that go into being successful. But I do what I do because I love it, not because it's a job. So I'm very lucky that way. I fell in love with the business right from the first time I started working at Bloomingdale's. It was a love affair. We also were very famous for buffalo plaids. Hello, how are you? What's going on? Freelance. What's with all the pins? You're always with the pins. I know freelance because if they don't have a name, that means they're freelance, right? Yep. How long have you been here? You're right. Who do you work for? Okay, cool. Is that off the shoulder dress selling?
Yes, it is. It's the one that's on.
Oh, it's on here, yeah. Really nice. Loudspeaker, please.
You're on, Mickey. Can I have your attention, please?
Can I have your attention here at J. Crew 5th Avenue, roaming with Sandy and Matt. I have to say the store looks spectacular. Great day yesterday. Congrats to the team. Anyway, I'll see you soon. Take care, bye. Yo, Spilkas, that's what I have. I have total ants in my pants. I have a huge curiosity. I do have the Spilkas also. But look, if you stop doing this all, then you get old. I love what I do, and it's mind exercise, and trying to do, it's really a sport to me.
When in your professional career did you know you made it? I've arrived.
I made it when Christmas rapping was on the radio. And I felt that excitement that my work was being played on the radio.
Christmas rapping.
That was my first record, 1979.
The guy named Curtis Blow, and Christmas is one thing I know. So every year, just about this time, I celebrate it with a rhyme.
Christmas rapping, it plays every year. I made it when I went to Amsterdam on a plane and never been anywhere. Curtis Blow and I landed in Amsterdam, and they said, "What would you like, Mr. Simmons?" So I was like, oh my God, he called me Mr. Simmons. My dad's not here, like who's? So, you know, that's making it, right?
Right.
There's no more making it than that.
What did you ask for?
Huh? Well, it doesn't matter for the cameras. I asked for cocaine and pussy. And at the president of Red Cup, he said, no problem. See, there's the success thing. What is that? I don't even use drugs anymore. Success was a little bit of validation that you and your hard work and your love and appreciation of this music and your thing is paying off. That someone recognizes, appreciates the work that you're contributing.
Yeah, look at it. The makerspace.
Nice.
They did this without, yeah, this is pretty cool. For girls, it's a big deal because when I went to work for Xerox, I had a lab, I had a technician. If you would have told me asked me about a drill press, I would have said, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a drill that presses, right? No idea how to understand how much skill and attention it takes to do it, and most of the stuff.
And that's when you became the head of the facsimile business.
That's right.
That really became
a huge deal. And right after that, I became the head of manufacturing and the supply chain.
Even more so then you had to understand how things are made.
Because you walk in, there's all these guys, all of them were men. How does it feel being a black CEO, black woman CEO? I said, well, for me, it feels kind of natural because that's what I've been, all black and woman, all my life, right?
Do you have any regrets whatsoever? Give me your top one, personally.
That I didn't have more children, but I didn't have time. I didn't have time, and I ran out of time and my body couldn't take it. Just structurally, business is still made for men. They made it.
How so?
I go to universities a lot and speak, and I always get the question, and how do I balance work and family? Women ask me this question all the time. So you're gonna marry the guy who's sitting next to you in your class and you're asking me, how do I balance work and family? You should ask him. Men never do.
How did you feel when people came at you saying that the Fed was responsible for the housing bubble?
Do I like it? Of course not. But since I know they are wrong, it does tilt the evidence of how I feel part of the issue is that, well, they're not terribly smart because they don't understand what they're doing. And the fact that other people have misunderstandings of how the world works, I'm not going to fret about that. It's not my job. When you deal with those many presidents as I have, they're people, and they all make judgments, good and bad. But what's remarkable about our system is that it works. I mean, it broke down once in 1860, and we solved that with the Civil War. But we've gotten through it.
You don't think it could break down again?
Do I fret about the immediate future? The immediate future, yeah. The longer term, no.
The American dream, is it still alive and well today?
There is no doubt in my mind. There's no doubt that it is. So now what we have to do, you, me, people who are engaged, the federal and state government has to look at this jewel and keep it going.
What up?
I got some music for you, bro. I'm a young R&B singer. I get it.
See my man, eat him up right there. I mean, there's a lot of benefit that I've given to people from my good fortune. But I wouldn't say, you know, that the American dream came from, or is, the measure is not
Wealth.
where I live or the wealth that I accumulated.
What is it?
It's the level of happiness.
Who lifted you up?
The opportunities that I had as a young person who grew up in the projects would probably not be available to me in almost any other country in the world other than America. And as a result of that, the American dream, the entrepreneurial opportunities, that is what gave me the opportunity.
I've evolved from someone who thought the stuff was important to a person who knows that the stuff is important. You know, there are places in this country where the American dream is lost. The lack of neediness is happiness. Needing nothing is bliss. So neediness, or make it, you gotta make more shit. Making the American dream, it continues.
It's a pretty good society. Big problems, huge cracks. Healthcare crack, education cracks, dislocation cracks. But the ability to actually face into it with good leadership and make progress is what this country is about. It's a value of ours. It's part of the American dream.
So do you feel like you've achieved the American dream?
Oh, of course. I mean, I look back and I say, how in the world did I get here?
I think New York is a melting pot of great people from all over the world. And I always suggest to the young people that come here, I say, just start here.
Can you be happy without success?
I don't think I could have been, given the drive and ambition I've had in my life. But then again, I don't know life without it. So, but I think I hopefully could have been. Maybe, no, I don't think so. I love that New York sense of edgy humor, urgency, and honesty. It's my home. It's my base.